Welcome to DigitalRoute's Policy Control webinar, and thank you to our partners Computaris for hosting this event on their platform. My name is Keith Brody, and I'll be co-presenting this session with my colleague Joakim Sahlgren. Between us, Joakim and I will be talking about the subject of policy, one that has attracted no shortage of attention over the past 24 months, but about which far more questions than answers are still outstanding. For sure, policy has been an attention grabber, but that is not to say that everything that's been said or done up to now has been valuable. So in the next half hour, Joakim and I plan to tackle two important questions head on. First, why policy now? And second, how do I tackle policy the right way? I'll take the first question, and Joakim will take over midway through this webinar to address the second. You should now be looking at the slide titled Service Industry Under Pressure, and this directly addresses why policy now. We, well those of us of a certain vintage anyway, live in an age where, from a services industry perspective, the world doesn't look much like it used to. In fact, the speed of change we're now experiencing means that things really don't look the same as they did as little as a decade ago, let alone longer than that. Goodness, I can remember growing up in a world where our family telephone was physically wired into the wall, by which I mean you couldn't move it. Imagine that, and I don't even consider myself old. But think about today. Services have increasingly been commoditized. So how do service providers differentiate? How do they, or you, win market share? In a nutshell, how do you survive? I think the answer might be what we could call price plus, where price is still central, but innovation is also critical, and an extended chain of partners and other contributors are involved in a service delivery landscape, the boundaries of which are blurred by the ever-increasing complexity of the services themselves. New services and new offers result from an ecosystem and become the lifeblood of the service provider's revenue growth. But these new offerings, perhaps unfortunately, don't exist in splendid isolation from the existing IT infrastructure of the service provider, on which they place significant demands and have a significant impact. In crude terms, they put growing amounts of stress on a legacy BSS backbone that 90% of the time was probably designed to accommodate services that don't look much like those that are around today, let alone tomorrow, at all. And it's not just services that are changing either. Business models, how revenue is generated, are changing in lockstep with them. Think of the new delivery mechanisms now tearing up the rulebook. Cloud is ubiquitous. In utilities, the flat grid is evolving into a smart grid. In telco, flat rate billing is being superseded by usage, and for that matter, in some cases, even the reverse is happening. Simultaneously, the regulatory landscape that governs all commerce is changing. If the fallout from the Wall Street crash of a couple of years ago doesn't appear to have hit the pocketbooks of hedge fund CEOs just yet, the demands for far greater reporting clarity have certainly reached the wider corporate world. And of course, there's the pressure of change related to service aggregation, which I alluded to earlier. The evidence is that we now live in an age of bundles and mashups and value chains, of multiple relationships that impact multiple points of the underlying infrastructure. This, all of it, leads to a simple realization. In a world where such a complex ecosystem and chain of events is necessary to generate revenues and differentiate oneself from one's competitors, it becomes inevitable that somewhere there will be a requirement for policing the complexity that has been created. Everything won't take care of itself. In this reality lies the answer to the question, why policy now? Today, no policy control really isn't an option. To add insult to injury, policy also provokes the question on the next slide. Where is your BSS taking you? And I mean that whether you're a user of BSS solutions or a vendor of them. because relying on the legacy status quo isn't an IT strategy that long-term is going to work. The good news is that I'm going to qualify that observation. Why? Because it's not true for all. And that's one of the reasons you're here, listening to this DigitalRoute Computaris webinar, to find out what you can do to make sure you are in the right place to successfully tap into a future that in reality is as packed with opportunity as it is with challenges. The image on this slide is actually not just funny, but pretty close to the money too. You'll recognize all you can eat, not just as the most common approach, still, to service provision and BSS today, but also the fastest way to end up in the middle of a long, dark and congested tunnel. The important question is why. We've already seen the reality of today's service provider market, constant and significant change. This is problematic because the BSS world has long been optimized to support pretty straightforward business models. Take billing, for instance. Accuracy and assurance have historically been the keywords. Get the bill right, plug the leaks, bingo. And if the business model is a voice call and the biggest challenge is, perhaps, interconnection, then in theory, that's a fair enough approach. But now the world has changed, even if the supporting infrastructure hasn't yet entirely kept up. And the need for policy solutions underlines this. In the new world, there is choice. A choice of service providers, a choice of services, and even a choice of service levels. In the new world, ensuring the quality of the customer experience is the real key to success. And that is why CEM has become such a buzzword of late in the BSS landscape. Customer experience now means something different than it used to, when to all intents and purposes it just meant an accurate, timely bill. Today, if you can't manage the breadth of the customer experience to the required degree, then all you can eat is what will inevitably result, and you will, sooner rather than later, end up in that long, dark, congested tunnel. These broad realities, which are realized in the specific issues outlined on this slide, fuel the drive towards policy control solutions. One way of putting it is to see policy control as one of the enabling tools of improved customer experience in the new commercial landscape. Look at the drivers listed on this slide. Fair usage, personalization, the myriad of new services being introduced, the issue of SLAs, the need to monitor both security and subscriber behavior, questions of churn and its relationship to network congestion. And then imagine a world without policy solutions to control these challenges and turn the problems they represent into opportunities to differentiate. The policyless world doesn't work, or if it does, it won't for long. Yet for many service providers, it is the world they're operating in today. Think back to the question, why policy now? The last slide explained why policy. This is the why now. This, in fact, is why one analyst told us in a casual conversation earlier in the year that no fewer than 200 software vendors had been identified who claimed to have a product that met the demands of PCRF. You think? So now that we've figured out that the first answers to the key policy questions are yes, I need a policy control solution, and I need it now, let's look at the policy choice that confronts the market in a little more detail. At this point, you'd be right for thinking that policy is going to open a treasure chest of opportunities, as the slide suggests. And it's true. Today's CSP has a lot of shiny new services within reach, which it could use to improve the customer experience and thus increase revenues and decrease churn, the holy grails. In the world of next-generation services, every day has the potential to be lucrative, with personalization, LTE, bundles, new products, different business models, all holding the power to change the competitive equation and redefine the landscape of the market. But no policy and the treasure chest stays shut. The real prizes remain tantalizingly out of reach. Sure, you can tap the services on a basic level, but you can't fully exploit them. And the future for service providers is only lucrative if they can really capitalize on the potential that innovation holds without creating secondary problems down the line. For instance, offering a video streaming service that simply clogs the network at peak times because it's built on a flat rate basis with no ability to manage the inevitably resulting congestion isn't a great approach to achieving next generation service success. Policy control can change that. Think of policy like this. It's the screwdriver that opens the treasure chest and liberates the opportunity in the new commercial landscape. Policy is what makes the newly identified service treasures a commercial success. This leads to a rather obvious conclusion. A broken screwdriver is not a good approach to liberating the opportunity that policy can provide. Yet according to our partners at DigitalRoute, solutions in the policy space today are proving inadequate to meet the challenges we've outlined and that they face. This suggests there's no shortage of broken screwdrivers in the market. Arguably, this shouldn't come as a surprise. In leading business schools, for instance, there has been growing recognition of the advantages of being second to market. Indeed, no less august a commentator than Franklin D. Roosevelt once observed that the early bird was often overvalued and overfavored, while the benefits of being the early worm, who presumably came second, were underestimated and ignored. To use a Gartnerism that most of us in this industry are familiar with, that's probably because many first-generation policy solutions were built and sold in the wave of inflated expectations that defines the early stage of a hype cycle perspective of the world. And what we've found out is this. That first wave of policy control platforms is currently being replaced. These are 2 to 4 year old boxes that don't work because they're not flexible enough to prevent locked-in dependencies to static use cases. Better performance and scalability to be able to grow with more load and support more complexity are required. More modularity is needed to support different architectures and evolution in the network and BOSS. Faster time to market, more flexibility, and quicker speed to market for new product support are considered crucial. Whether it's broken screwdrivers or the myriad of service innovation opportunities characterized in this slide that policy control puts within reach, there is no shortage of reasons to explain why policy now. Everywhere the service provider turns, from the need to act on traffic and usage, to the desire to tap the potential of targeted advertising, from the need to ease network congestion, to the impetus to launch new business models, service providers find opportunities that policy control is necessary to fully exploit. But I think, as one of the Apollo 13 astronauts famously put it, when it comes to the need for effective policy control, many in the industry today remain at the Houston "we have a problem" stage. Fortunately, this need no longer be the case. There are now effective policy control choices. And that's as good a point as any for me to hand over to my colleague Joakim Sahlgren, who can address the second question we want to tackle today: how to get policy right. Joakim.
Thank you, Keith. For years we have all heard a talk about the need for various types of convergence: postpaid, prepaid convergence, BSS, OSS convergence, network convergence, and so on. Though much progress has been made, the fact is that the service providers' networks and data infrastructure are still split across verticals with a substantial number of overlapping systems and functions. This topic remains important as the fragmentation costs service providers millions of dollars every year and prevents deployment of new services. This is a general concern related to BSS or OSS architecture, but policy control is not just another system. all evidence indicates that it is increasingly taking on a more central role for creating new opportunities and enhancing the customer experience. So where should it be deployed? There is one system that is managed by network operations as often as the IT department. In fact, it sits right in between, and this is where you have the opportunity to unify access to all data, both external and internal, offline and online, and act on it. Not just to provision policies to the network, but to change every aspect of the customer experience. I'm talking about mediation, of course, and the combination of flexibility and access is why we have decided to build our policy control solution directly on the Mediation Zone platform. According to a recent study by TM Forum, integration is perceived as one of the key challenges and barriers to policy control deployments. This is no surprise to us, as this has really been the focus and strength of DigitalRoute since the inception of the company 12 years ago. During this time we have developed a platform that enables our customers to extend its core functionality and add new interfaces, both proprietary and according to standards. Providing a flexible integration framework is really at the core of what we do, and what we see is that with the amount of change that is continuously taking place in the CSP environment, there is really no way of keeping up if you have to rely on vendor customizations. This is true not only for policy control but for applications across BSS OSS. DigitalRoute policy control is aligned with the policy-related and diameter routing standards set out by 3GPP. However, it should be noted here that the 3GPP view on what policy control is rather network-centric more than customer-centric, and being 100% compliant with PCRF standards is by no means a warranty for easy integration. The policy can be about managing resources and handling spending control limits. You may want to drive consumption and loyalty, promote offload solutions, or improve customer experience based on subscribers' personal preferences. For this you may need data that is not directly available in the core network or the online charging system. It could reside anywhere since it's not mapped to any specific standard. Standards are also constantly being revisioned, and interpretations may differ. Successful integration is a moving target, and you need to be agile if you're going to catch up. Some time ago, one of our customers in Northern Europe decided that they needed a new type of offering for mobile data to subscribers roaming abroad. The problem that they had was that their existing business support systems were not real-time enabled, and achieving their target would take too much time, and this meant that they would miss the important vacation season where they had the opportunity to capitalize on this. From the very start of the project, including requirement specification to live operation, this project took 3 months to complete. And if you wonder if this is good or bad, consider that the time to market for a single use case is typically twice as long for some of the most common policy products on the market. Our customers has continued to build on this solution and will soon launch real-time control applied to home network products as well. One of the great benefits for this customer was that the solution had no impact on the existing BSS infrastructure. However, it adds a real-time enablement layer that did not exist before. Solutions must be easy to maintain, and the first and second wave of policy control products were not flexible and often designed for very specific use cases. Modifying these black boxes sometimes requires complete software upgrades. This is something that we have strived to address, and perhaps it came a bit like a surprise to one of our system integration partners when they by themselves managed to configure 16 use cases in our solution in a period of 2 weeks' time. What was perhaps even more surprising to them is that they managed to do this with just 1 day of training. So how does this work? Well, we do provide predefined cases to work with. What makes a difference is that these cases can easily be modified even at the most fundamental level, including the execution of the business logic. These use cases are provided as packages that can be combined to create even more advanced cases. But having all these options won't be worth anything unless the system scales, and Mediation Zone scales to handle both the load increase and the complexity increase that comes with this new prominent role. We do this through a high-performing scale-out architecture that has been verified at more than 250 customers. When we first started to design our solution a few years ago, we realized that some customers already had some of the components that we needed to include, and they were perfectly satisfied with them, at least for now. So being neither a vendor of network technology or online charging systems, we decided that the solution must be modular so that the customer can pick only the components that they need. As part of this strategy, we also work with partners to provide network functions like DPI and policy enforcement. For example, one of our customers has a system for creating and maintaining policy definitions and chooses to provision those into our solution. So the policy definition functions are not mandatory. And if you don't have an online charging system or a centralized subscriber repository, or if you cannot deliver hybrid and multi-place services, you would be interested in the usage counting functionality. This is where we differentiate services by, for example, counting usage of devices or applications, and we make use of this information, for example, by triggering policies. Fact is, we could use this to trigger data records, end-user communication, alarms, or anything else. But again, if you don't need it, you don't need it, especially if it's already being done somewhere else. In short, you don't have to buy one box that includes everything, or rather a little bit of everything, including a mini online charging system. You can pick the modules that fits with your architecture and take a stepwise approach towards an optimized environment. If you look at the early policy deployments, it used to be something like this. You purchased a certain package including a number of megabytes or gigabytes. A policy was provisioned to the network and it would rarely change, if ever. This is not the case anymore. Policies are dynamic and decisions can be initiated from more than one point. For example, applications such as video on demand, voice over LTE, or on-demand quality of service upgrades can trigger changes of ongoing data sessions independently of each other. This means that you need the ability to correlate multiple policy control sessions in real time. But if you really are going to create a personalized and unique customer experience, you cannot be restrained to what is happening right now. What has happened in the past and how can we use that to make predictions on what is about to happen in, say, 2 days from now, and include that in policy decisions. As an example, should we create a policy for what should happen if poor quality is observed during a sliding time window of, let's say, 1 month? Some of our customers are using Mediation Zone to perform that type of analysis today. And this is an area that we believe is going to be very important in the years to come, and this is why we are now extending policy control with complex event processing and decisioning. And with that, I would like to hand over back to Keith. Thank you.
Thanks, Joakim. That brings us to the end of today's webinar. Joakim, myself, and indeed our colleagues at DigitalRoute would be delighted to answer any questions you'd care to submit to us. Please send them to the email address you can currently see on your screens. We'd also welcome the opportunity to guide you through our policy control solution one-to-one. We'd like to thank you again for attending, and especially thank our partner Computaris for hosting this event. We appreciate your time, taking the time to listen in, and we wish you a good afternoon.